Hello and welcome to today's FS Tech webinar brought to you in partnership with Cloudera. I'm Jonathan Easton, editor of FS Tech, and I'll be your host as we dive into a topic that's shaping the future of financial services, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, or DORA. In a world where digital transformation is evolving at an unprecedented pace, the need for resilience and adaptability in financial operations has never been greater. DORA is not just a regulatory framework, it's a roadmap for ensuring stability, security, and operational excellence in an increasingly digital financial landscape. Today, we'll explore how modern data strategies and AI-driven innovation intersect with DORA's principles, helping financial institutions meet the demands of both compliance and cutting-edge innovation. We'll address questions like how do we integrate advanced data architectures for compliance? What does operational resilience look like in an AI-driven world? And critically, how do financial organizations position themselves for growth while navigating this complex regulatory terrain? To help unpack these topics, because there's no way I could do this by myself, I'm thrilled to introduce our panel of experts: Jeremy Reams, Director of Corporate Strategy at Cloudera, Dan Petrovic, Operating Partner at Gunnar Cook OP, and Daniela War, IT Security Manager at Marker Study. Each of our speakers will share unique perspectives on the challenges and opportunities presented by DORA, highlighting practical strategies for resilience and innovation. So to kick us off, Danny, I'll turn to you and ask, how does DORA's emphasis on ICT risk management affect the development and deployment of AI systems in financial institutions?
Hello, thank you, Jonathan. It's great to be here with you today. So from my perspective, we need to look at how risks are managed, because DORA is a lot about ICT risk management it does have a ICT risk management framework, and AI will be part of that framework as well. So what we need to be looking at when we're trying to implement AI into the processes, what the data risks are, what the model risks are, what the operational risks are, and then the last but not least, ethical and legal risks as well. So when you are implementing AI, you need to be sure that all of the risks to any of those items are within your risk tolerance. Your AI models, your AI functions must be ready for audits and updates, because the financial institutions are required to regularly review and update their risk management frameworks and make sure they're up to date and in line with the regulations. There will be requirements to have an outstanding documentation and be compliant with DORA. You need to manage all of the AI systems as well as documentation. This needs to be underpinned by operational resilience. So you need to make sure that your AI activities or AI processes are robust and ensure that they are recoverable in quick time. So it must really be contributing to the overall digital operational resilience. We need to be thinking about vendor management, because not only the operations we are running might be underpinned by AI, but our vendors we are relying on might be using AI. And how do we ensure that they are in agreement or compliant with the DORA regulation in their AI systems, and how do we know that they will not fail us if they are our critical systems? So there's a lot to think about.
Thank you very much, Danny. Very comprehensive overview there. Dan, I'll come to you. You know, in your position, you're obviously speaking with a lot of financial institutions, insurers, banks, digital banks. Based on what Danny's talked about there, does that resonate with sort of conversations that you have?
Yeah, that's a great overview, Danny. And thanks. Nice to be here, Jonathan. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, so absolutely. From an asset manager perspective, I look at it from a practitioner perspective. So I'm an asset owner, asset operator. So I'm looking at it from that seat. And invariably, we're looking at AI to make private AI, hopefully, to make decisions to support information. But invariably, it's creeping into all the vendor relationships, as Daniela points out quite rightly. And the way that those frameworks, they may not have frameworks in place, ironically, because this is a new technology. So having had them thought through those frameworks is probably unlikely. And it's a really good question that you raised, because most of these companies are using either a multiple of public generative AI models, and it's really sort of digging into where is the data, how is it put together, how is it classified, what can I extract from my data, and so forth. And really, it's the distinction between private and public models, really, that a lot of people don't really even dig into. So when it's AI is a fantastic tool if you can use it internally, how I look at it. And I think most organizations should be using it internally in the first instance. And I can see it being, I take a slightly different slant, more a practitioner view, in that if you want to be compliant, I think in my view, prevention is always better than the cure. So if you use AI, I'd use AI internally as a preventative method to make sure that it can help you with your compliance before you even get, if you're using vendors, then use vendors that are using it to help you be compliant. And that might be in forms of teaching your staff and learning your algorithm to do training around compliance matters and AML. And I find that those things might be a really good starting point before you start moving into the more advanced uses in the data science realms, where Daniela's and Jeremy's teams might be looking at it from their side, or in the data warehouses and so forth. But I think with the organizations, I look at smaller, medium-sized organizations who are highly regulated or not regulated at all, and they might have a totally different view on, and they have to look at it as an enterprise model, but they had to take the core elements that Danielle has pointed out and explained to us, but still apply it to their own data approach. And that is management buy-in, start with the data, where is it, and start classifying what that data is, and then how you can comply with it, and make sure that you can unwind yours from it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dan. Jeremy, I could see you nodding along to a lot of what was mentioned there, and I'm sure it was quite resonant points.
No, absolutely. And a fascinating discussion. First of all, Jonathan, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to speak about some of these topics. The market is moving so fast. You have new vendors coming in left, right, and center, LLM providers, agent providers, new data management providers. And I think what DORA does a good job of doing is serving as a forcing mechanism to really evaluate, who are your third-party vendors? Where is your data going? What is the risk of putting your data in a hosted model outside of your own data framework, and what are the results that you're going to get from that? It's a lot of questions. The data management space, the AI space, moving incredibly fast. But I think you can't afford to move fast at the expense of risk, and especially when it comes to your own customers' data, that's paramount. And I think what we're hearing from our customers is they're excited, they see the value, but they have to operate under the confines of making sure that their customers are protected. And I think that's what we're all about in terms of making sure that's all enabled.
So building on that, what that next step, how can organizations effectively integrate, modern data architectures such as data lakehouses to meet both their innovation needs around AI and also the DORA compliance?
Yeah, no, great question. I think it's really about flexibility in terms of where you're going to be able to access your data, control. Are you able to see your data end to end? And then the form factor of your choice for your given risk tolerance and the given performance requirements. Another inflection point that we really haven't talked about broadly, but we're seeing in massive undercurrents in our customer base, is interoperability. A new table format has really taken hold of Iceberg, and maybe if you've heard about it with the acquisition of Tabular by Databricks, adoption by Snowflake. AWS just came out at reInvent with their ability to integrate Iceberg. Same thing with Cloudera. And what that gives you is the ability to see across your data estate and be able to bring in data wherever you need it. And I think that is all great. More context, more access, more control, but it requires more vigilance in terms of where your data lives and being able to monitor the end-to-end state and nature of how that data travels across from one user to the other to the end value.
Thank you, Jeremy. Really interesting point there. It seems a minefield. There are lots and lots of different options and solutions and approaches out there. Danny, what are your thoughts on this question around integrating modern data architectures in a manner that meets both compliance and innovation needs?
Thank you. So I think there might be a need for unified data management, because you've got data lake houses and you've got data warehouses, and they combine the best out of both. But if you know how you manage your data, that should really help with the compliance. The enhanced data security as well, robust controls around access, because AI is great, but it inherits the permissions from a specific, let's say if the AI is performing a role, so specific user, and if that user has admin access and goes to SharePoint and somewhere else, you need to be really careful to understand what the permissions are. So that is absolutely crucial. Then we need to have scalable and flexible infrastructure. That's one of those things where you don't really want to run out of space, quite frankly, because that's not really DORA compliant. And for me, I would say automated compliance monitoring if possible. So if we can leverage the AI and machine learning within the data lakehouse and just automate the compliance monitoring, it ensures a seamless transition and minimizes the disruption. So for me, that is quite essential. I don't know, how about other people's views?
Well, yeah, it'd be interesting to get your perspective, Dan. Danny is coming at this from the perspective of one of the largest insurers in the UK, and as you mentioned, Dan, you work with a lot of more smaller organisations who are more agile and probably more innovation inclined. Do you find the conversations you have with them, you kind of have to pin them back a bit in terms of integrating all of this stuff in a manner that actually is compliant, or is that something that's always kind of on their minds?
So compliance is always on their minds, and it's introducing a culture of compliance with the management teams right from the start. And it might not mean that they're having to do this themselves, but they might be going to organizations like Jeremy's or Daniela's, who might be providing them the value added service of their company and ensuring their organizations are following these frameworks. So one of the key things that resonates with me, what the teams have mentioned, is around observability, and it's a lot of companies think about that. They don't understand what that means in terms of there's a whole data mountain there, and Jeremy can talk about mountains, lakes, all of it, I'm sure. But the
Mountains, lakes sounds like a great holiday.
yes, exactly. I think I'm already there. So, but we're in a world where essentially our currency is data, and how we classify that data is super vital. So the organizations I deal with are in the alternative investment space, and to them, their data is their gold, effectively. And if we look at the companies who are using maybe digital ledger technologies and transacting in maybe digital versions of currencies, or taking traditional currencies, for example, or traditional securities, and then overlaying them with new technologies. This is where this sort of mesh of siloed data and traditional data sort of, end up getting mixed. But what's interesting is with this new world of DLT infrastructure, um, they ponder the idea of public and private and permission data and metadata, and it forces that sort of thinking through, which I find good, because a lot of the organizations at a senior level don't really need to start right. Where are their customers? What are they doing? What are the needs for those customers? And then overlay that with those risk frameworks and what that data is doing. No, when you're in small organization, you're just dealing with investing and trading and so forth. You know exactly what you want from that data. How many parties are involved, how many layers, and where is it going to go? So it's a lot simpler for them to think about the context there. Whereas with all large organizations, the context is so much more varied, I find, with Cloudera and market study, because the type of nature of the client base and what they might be doing with it is so variable. So yeah, I mean, if from my side, it goes into that whole thinking about the same things slightly different, and then also pushing back onto the vendors who have established processes that we can rely on, and then overlaying that with a framework where we can observe what they are doing on a framework that on a cadence that meets the business requirements, because that's where DORA will come in. You want to make sure that you're testing for some of these risk hypotheses so that you'll never get to them. And because the environments are changing so frequently, that's where this knowledge at the top needs to come from. You need to start at the top and think about those big topics, and it's a lot easier said than done, I think. Yeah.
Well, Dan, you mentioned there, having that almost top-down view, and Danny also mentioned the importance of implementing unified data management approaches. But Jeremy, what are some of the key challenges in implementing a unified data management approach in a manner that aligns with DORA's requirements for operational resilience?
Yeah, great question. I think that DORA really provides the impetus for you to have a really sound data mesh framework, a governance that is from end to end across all your entire data estate, aligned with the company values and aligned with being able to support the guidelines within DORA. And that said, what we're finding from customers the other week, I met with a very large UK bank, and some of the challenges that they were having was that they have data on-prem, they have data locked in specific countries, and they want to be able to raise the data up very seamlessly and easily for financial reporting. On top of that, they want to be able to control who has access to that data, because it's incredibly important that no sensitive data is permeated across the people in the company who shouldn't have that. Two challenges, very tough to solve in and of themselves. And what it requires is a framework and ability to have a lakehouse centered around either Iceberg or other open table formats, so you can see more data, data lineage capabilities, so that you can see end to end from a column level view all the way down to an endpoint, all the way up to an endpoint view of where the data is going, who has access to the data at every step of the way, all the way from sourcing it to a database to surveying it into a BI dashboard to having that actual report published. Where is the data? And with today's technology, you have the ability to do that. Cloudera recently acquired Octopi just for that, to be able to cross any type of form factor. But we're seeing that as table stakes within the market. Really, the big differentiator is easy use and then full control, which are really tough to marry in one stroke. So those are the things that we're seeing thus far. A lot of excitement from our customer base to be able to deliver that. The other thing that Dan had touched on, which I think you can't understate, is observability. There's a lot of different motivations in terms of why a customer would want to have observability. Are there Spark ETL workloads running in the most optimized fashion? If it's not, you're going to incur a lot of TCO and you're going to have a lot of unhappy stakeholders. Are you really able to pull the full amount of the data using Impala? Are there any errors that are being generated such that you would be outside of compliance? Maybe you're not pulling the full data set. You'd want to know that. And so that's something that observability helps with. It's a lot of challenges, but I think the tech today is answering a lot of those challenges, despite the fact of how we're moving so fast as an industry.
Thank you, Jeremy. Lots in there: observability, data sovereignty. Danny, as one of those firms dealing with this stuff on a daily basis, what are your thoughts in terms of the challenges of implementing a unified data management approach?
Thank you, Jonathan. I think Jeremy's points are all valid. I don't have much to add, but I would add a little bit more on that. So in complex organizations, you might have issues with data governance and data quality. So if you use information in one system and it travels somewhere, is it the same data? Is it really what we collected for the right purpose? Can we use it? And just making sure that the data is what you think it is, rather than if we have lost sight somewhere along the line, then we have problems. And I feel that maybe in complex organizations where there are lots of acquisitions, they might have a bit of an issue with the data governance, because it might be a large organization where you've got different approach to these things. So it has to be unified, but it's just not as easy to implement as one would want.
Very interesting. Thank you, Danny. And Dan, I'll come to you. What's within all of this? What are some strategies that can be employed to overcome the barriers to end-to-end data management? Like data volume, complexity, security concerns. How can firms overcome those barriers?
I'll touch on maybe something. I'll touch on the cyber barrier because I think I'll leave the data barrier and the size data lake side to Jeremy to answer, because I think that's much more in his wheelhouse. I think take an example around cyber. Cyber affects any version of organization. It's applicable whether you're large or small, and the threat from cyber is huge. So I think all these topics around the frameworks around buying from the top, understanding what data you got, and then overlaying that with your BCP, DR systems is probably the biggest threat for your organization, because that's where your ICT or your organization will come apart. And when I look at it from a unified data perspective, it's around taking products which have been built using AI to provide in-flight feedback to your organization. And it's so no organization, nothing stays the same. So you can't turn around and say week to week that the real estate of the internal and external fabric stays the same, because it's a multitude of companies that have been acquired, service providers that are hosted elsewhere. So having that observability from a cyber perspective is really key, and having that frequency, the cadence for a piece of software and that might work with something like ServiceNow in a bank that sits on top, and it will observe the workflow that's going on and work in a third-party risk management framework, and take the cyber elements and observe the in-flight operation to say, right, X amount of servers need patching, X amount of systems need addressing, or such and such is potentially a critical issue, is the kind of things that boards need to understand and appreciate in their real estate. And they need to have that report so they can say, okay, before we go and implement the next internal update or patch or system that might affect multiple global systems, can we have a snapshot of our systems where they are today? And before we do that, and then afterwards, after we've done it, to ensure that the organization can show accountability. Yeah, because that's what it's really about. It's about trying to show you have operational excellence. It won't prevent it sometimes from happening, but if you've got a good governance and compliance infrastructure in place, in theory, the way that the architecture is put together should mean that no critical areas, if something falls apart, it should mean that the other areas should carry on operating in theory. In the way that data storage is put together, you have multiple failover states. But the cyber is your kind of key, I think, to having a look at that real estate, because it's the one thing in flight that can trigger where you are where you think you are. You might go to bed at night thinking, I'm good. I've got the best cyber systems. I've got the latest stuff from the biggest organizations. No doubt you have. However, where are they in real time based on where your organization's at, whether you're a small, medium, or large organization, and having that observability so you know afterwards what's been done after you've made those changes. Because I can bet you in a month's time, new updates have come and you'll be in a new state. So and I
Thank
think
you,
yeah, so I mean maybe yeah, so
Yeah, I was just about
yeah.
to say, Dan, you've talked eloquently there about the kind of the cyber aspect of this conversation around the barriers to data management. From kind of more of the data perspective, Jeremy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, when it comes to data in large scale, at Cloudera, we know it quite well. We manage over 25 exabytes of data, which, to put that in perspective, is 25 million iPhones worth of data. It is a heck of a lot of data. And we handle some of the most marquee banks. I think everyone would know them quite well across the US and across the UK. What we're seeing from our customers is there's two really big issues. Issue one is what is a problem that you're trying to solve for today, and the vendors that they're looking for, does it match their current needs? But also, you can't just think about today, you got to think about the future, because data growth is exponential. And if you choose a vendor, is that a vendor that's going to be able to scale with you? this industry is really great at marketing. Everybody scales, whether you're a small startup or you're an incredibly large hyperscaler. But our customers really have found that they really need to do their due diligence in terms of what are the capabilities that are being marketed, what are the actual capabilities. Because we have run across a few customers who have been, disappointed with using very small data management vendors. They'll read the materials, they'll see the word scale, and they think, okay, well, got a couple terabytes now, I'm going to get to maybe a petabyte. But when it actually comes to the performance, sometimes it doesn't meet their requirements. So being incredibly educated, testing, doing due diligence at the nth degree is incredibly important. The ones who do it the best, when we do a new release, there's a few rounds of testing. It's not just, does it work once or twice? Does it work for multiple use cases? How do I break it? What are the limits that I actually need to get to? And there's investment required to be able to do that. But when there's confidence that a data management platform or capability can actually scale to the requirements that are needed under the DORA framework, then that is what customers see incredibly valuable. And there's very few data management platforms that really scale to a very, very large degree. And that's rare and hard to find in terms of being able to suit your TCO, your security requirements, and your business objectives. So yeah, I think my advice for any listeners out there is just make sure you really do your homework on your data management provider so that it meets all of your technical and business requirements.
Thank you, Jeremy. Danny, I'll come to you on this, just to build on what Jeremy's talked about there. What are your thoughts? I'm not going to grow you too much on the third-party providers you use, but in terms of that piece around balancing the kind of impact tolerances with the other aspects of DORA when it comes to end-to-end data management.
So thank you, Jonathan. I think Jeremy had great insights. So did Dan. I think the vendor management will be critical, and just don't let people sell you the hot air. Make sure you actually know what you're buying, because from experience we had, not in this company, previous one, we had where promises and ended up as a not suitable product because it just didn't do what it said on the tin. So absolutely agree with that. I think for me, strategies to be implemented or employed to overcome the barriers to end-to-end management, on the top of everything that's been said, would be leveraging data integration tools. So you've got lots of data in different places, and again, if it's a complex environment, what does that look like? How do they work together? Do you know where they are? Can that tool help you manage the end-to-end management? And then for me, upskilling and resource planning. So many colleagues will probably not have a great experience, will not understand why the data management is important, or what does the data governance look like anyway. There might be policy somewhere. Did they read it? Does it mean anything to them? So just making sure you make your workforce understand what that means and what that means to them, for me is quite critical, because the better you educate your colleagues around any topic, whether it's data governance or security, the less work you will have, because they will do the right thing naturally, because that's what they are programmed to do. It's I don't believe people are doing things deliberately wrong. They just probably don't know what the right thing is. So this upskilling and training people will massively help with overcoming any barriers to the end-to-end data management for me.
Yeah, that could be its own webinar on its own in terms of the conversation around skill management and upskilling staff. Really fascinating topic. But I just want to go back to what you mentioned, and you've mentioned a couple of times about where the data actually is. And Jeremy, how does the increasing adoption of hybrid and multi-cloud capabilities support DORA compliance and enhance overall operational resilience?
Yeah, great question. For a long time coming, we've had this premise that hybrid was going to rule the market, that cloud, incredibly fast growth, great scalability. But what we've seen over the past 3 to 5 years, but even more so lately, is that scalability has a price. And it's not just TCO, it's also security risk. So we're starting to see, while there is wider adoption of cloud, the emergence of putting all your data in cloud, moving all your chips into one estate, there's a little bit of a retrenchment because that can open you up to security risks. And that's the last thing any of our customers, especially in financial services, would want. So while, you have seen a few CEOs say everything goes to cloud, it's starting to come back. And being able to have some of your really secure private data on-prem is incredibly valuable, but also hard to do. So what we're seeing is our customers are finding really creative backdoor methods to be able to pipe their data in from on-prem into the cloud or vice versa, using NiFi, using hybrid control planes, using data management platforms that have the ability to cross both planes of glass. What we have at Cloudera is already those capabilities that allow customers to run their similar workloads on-prem and in the cloud. It's something that's really hard to do in terms of data management platform providers will either stick on one or the other. So I think what we're seeing is a lot of market feedback in terms of that has an incredible amount of value because it serves the outcomes of better TCO, but also better security in the form factor of your choice.
Thank you, Jeremy. Dan, what are your thoughts then on that point around hybrid, multi-cloud? I'm sure that what Jeremy mentioned there about this previous idea that this approach would be the kind of the done thing, and then it's interesting what Jeremy was mentioning there about there being a bit more of a scaling back. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Jeremy classifies it well. It does. Security comes at a cost. So if you want to have the most secure system, you have to have enterprise equipment. End of, yeah. You have to have it at one one component of your company at least. If you're a startup, you're always grappling with cost versus revenue. And with those startups, what I've tended to find is that they run fast and break things, and they may go for a full cloud infrastructure, which is fine. But as long as you pick components in that cloud infrastructure which have an enterprise component, so when you decide to move that back in house, and the life cycle is you start with a fully outsourced, low cost, low monthly recurring cost running your operation, and then as you grow, scale, and get more revenue and more balance sheet, you may decide to put those core services in house. But what's important in the start is to have the critical bits running on enterprise equipment, and those are the bits that are going to serve your clients and your product, and make sure it's not it does what it's supposed to do and it doesn't pull down. So that definitely on that point, I'd say you're it's hard to think enterprise when you're a startup and you're an entrepreneur. But having someone who's an experienced CTO or a CISO come in, or someone who's got an operational experience from I work for listed companies, global listed companies, and having a view from, well, actually, this bit is super critical to your business. If that doesn't work, that gets infiltrated, everything's gone. I think having someone who comes in and just gives you an alternative viewpoint is so valuable to this discussion. And then Jeremy's last point around a pane of glass, I love that phrase because it is, and that's to his point around the data lake. It's a pane of glass. Whether it's you shouldn't really. Some of it will probably be best serviced in the cloud, and you may decide leave it as that because you're dealing with multiple organizations around the world. You have different, and then other components you'll migrate that data back into your core enterprise system, and you'll run this sort of low cost, high security component that you own in your area. And you do need a pane of glass to look at it across the board. There's a company that I'm familiar with called Cavaris, and they run a cyber business, and they just essentially promote a pane of glass across their architecture, which is looking at it from a cyber perspective. Really resonated with me.
Very fascinating. Thank you very much, both of you, on that point. There's just one last thing that I want to look at, kind of future gazing, as it were, before we wrap up here. And Danny, I'll start with you. What do you view as being some of the potential long-term impacts that DORA could have on the financial sector's approach to risk management and operational resilience?
That's a great question, Jonathan. Thank you for asking that. So, in my view, it will provide us with standardization of a process, which is really helpful because DORA aims to harmonize the ICT risk management and operational resilience practices across the EU. So we will have some kind of assurance that the financial institutions are there and thereabouts safe, hopefully. So that's one thing. Proactive risk management I will call out as well, because there might be that companies now are quite with the risk management not quite there, and doing things like, oh yeah, that'll be fine, I'll just sign it off. They will have to think twice now whether that is a risk that's within the tolerance, and whether they are actually going to provide that in the report to the authorities, or whether they're actually going to fix the risk that's being brought to them. Then the enhanced third-party oversight, we talked about third-party today lots and lots, but there will be impact because people will be, or organizations will be more careful with the third parties and making sure that actually, yes, you are DORA compliant as my vendor, rather than, oh yeah, that's a great deal, let's go with it, whatever that means. I think also this will bring improved response and recovery. Incident response is really, really critical. And if that's not in order, if you haven't tested your backups and you just think you can recover, that's not really good enough. So as it's part of the DORA, the ICT framework and everything else will actually support the organizations being in better shape. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, Dan, I'll come to you. You know, what are your thoughts on what Danny's mentioned there, and your views on the potential long-term impacts of DORA on risk management and operational resilience?
I'm going to be a little bit totally uncontroversial here. I agree with everything Daniela said. She's spot on. She's laid it out correctly. It will actually help organizations, but it's now a question of how those organizations, what they do about it, to your point. And we're in a world where data overload. So that's why it's important to start with a methodology with the board, have a buy-in, and have those first conversations with them so they understand the meaning of that, so that they can then set in the wheels in motion, because there is an economic cost to doing this. So the board needs to see it through that, as certain organizations who are large in the financial services space, they may reduce cost in areas and increase because revenues increase in others, so they may move things around. That has implications to how total cost is recorded, but it has implications to security and to deliverable. And I think that's the bit that boards need to own, and I think that's where they need to dig into. So having a methodology and really understanding that you're accountable for that, and then your your point around when was the last observability? When did you last test it? How sure are you that you tested it? Should we be testing it more frequently? It was quite evident that a lot of organizations in the summer, when people might have been on holiday, they didn't do a BCP test because they would have known there are organizations that you wouldn't have to ground flights, if a certain patch didn't work. So I think, that it really does put the case in point. So it's a wake up call to a lot of organizations. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. Just to round us out here, Jeremy, what are your thoughts on what you've heard so far on this topic of the future of operational resilience in the financial sector and DORA's impact on it?
Yeah, no, appreciate it. I think Danielle and Dan did some really great opining in terms of how the organization is going to stand to benefit. The way I kind of think about it is, the way you measure success for DORA is what's going to happen in the next 10 years for the enterprises that did adopt DORA, and those did not, maybe they're outside of the EU. And what is the customer implication? If I'm a large multinational and I have $100 million, I need to put it in reserves. Am I going to be better off putting it in a DORA compliant bank? I think the answer is yes, because they are forward thinking in terms of making sure that they're testing their systems, making sure it's secure. And we've already seen a few banks in the market. I won't name them, but outside the globe that cutting costs is not the best outcome because it drives exposures and risks. And once those risks are exposed, customers are less likely to want to bank with you. So I think that's what's the measure for success. You take a look at in the next 10 years, your customer, where do you place your money? I think it's going to be those that are going to be the banks that are DORA compliant. So I'm excited to see how it all shapes up. There's a lot of opportunity in the market with so many cool innovations that are arriving, not just AI, but there's still a lot of stuff that's going on in the back end, and all that is happening at such a rapid pace. I think DORA kind of really centers, the data management teams to ensure that they're not moving ahead of their skis and that they're putting their customers first. So excited to see how it all unfolds.
Yeah, it'll be a fascinating time to see how operational resilience evolves following the implementation of DORA on January 19th. So it'll be fascinating to come back here in a year's time and see how that's all got on, and in 10 years' time and see how it's all got on. So, but for now, I think that's a perfect way of wrapping up our discussion. So over the past 40 minutes or so, we've explored the critical role of DORA in driving operational resilience, discussed the challenges and opportunities of integrating modern data architectures like data lakehouses, and examined how AI innovation and hybrid cloud solutions can align with regulatory compliance. And it's clear that building a secure, adaptable data foundation is not just about meeting requirements, it's about positioning financial institutions for long-term growth and innovation. A huge thank you to our fantastic panel of experts for sharing their insights and expertise. Jeremy Reams from Cloudera, Dan Petrovic from Gunnar Cook OP, and Daniela War from Market Study. On behalf of FS Tech and Cloudera, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. And I'm Jonathan Easton, editor of FS Tech, and we look forward to seeing you for the next FS Tech webinar. Goodbye.